Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm super excited for today's video. It is going to be my third update in the No Pan Left Behind series that I started doing on my channel here in 2023. I exchanged this project, or exchanged the Pan Those Eyeshadows project for this project because Pan Those Eyeshadows just really has not been working for me the last couple of years. And I really enjoy trying new eyeshadow palettes more than I do panning eyeshadow pans. I still enjoy panning eyeshadow pans, and I am doing a Pan That palette this year, which I will leave linked down below. But I found that when I was doing Pan Those Eyeshadows, I was getting hyper fixated on like one shade in a palette, and the rest of that palette and the rest of my palette collection was going virtually untouched. And so I decided to shift this year into No Pan Left Behind, meaning that I roll in 4 palettes at any given time to be working on. And in order to complete that palette or roll it out, I need to use every single shade within that eyeshadow palette at least one time. I'm very excited. I have 3 out of my 4 palettes that will be rolling out today, which is exciting yet nerve-wracking because you never know what palettes are going to roll in its place. But if you're interested in seeing my progress, which palettes I completed in this No Pan Left Behind series, stay tuned. First, if you have yet to subscribe to my channel and you like project panning content, palette themed content, or just chit-chatting about makeup, I'd love if you'd consider subscribing before moving on. And other than that, let's jump into the video. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. My windows are open because it's finally nice enough to have the windows open here in Minnesota. So if you're hearing cars driving by, I do apologize. Also, my lips are so incredibly dry, so no matter what lip product I put on it, my lips just look really funky. It is what it is. Let's get into this update. Before this update, I had completed 3 palettes in like the No Pan Left Behind. That is not including new eyeshadow palettes to my collection. Any new palettes that have come into my collection in 2023, in order for me to finish like the testing process, I like to use each shade at least one time. I really do try and use every shade in each palette at least 3 times before I finish the testing process. So I'm not including any new eyeshadow palettes that came into my life in 2023, but I had completed 3 palettes, and as of the progress I'm about to share with you, I will now have completed 6 palettes throughout my palette collection, which honestly just makes me so excited because even thinking through like my palette usage in years past, when I would reach for eyeshadow palettes, it wasn't like I was reaching for each palette with the intent or purpose to try and use every single shade. And there's some palettes that I feel so unfamiliar with some shades, or there's shades that intimidate me, or I don't really think about a palette in terms of like what I can complete, like what I can use that palette for in order to make a complete look. I'm like, can I complete a thought? So this has really forced me to try and just look at the singular palette and just use one palette to create a full eyeshadow look, which has also been really challenging and really fun for me as well. I've hit 3 eyeshadow pans this year so far in 2023, most of those being from my Sultry palette, which is my Pan That palette again. That'll be linked below in case you're interested in checking that out. Let's begin this update with the one palette that won't be rolling out, and that is my Huda Beauty Rose Quartz palette. And I did not reach for this at all throughout the month of March. I know this update is coming relatively late, but I am still filming this in the beginning-ish of April, but I didn't use this at all in March. This is what this palette is looking like. I will post a picture on the screen that has the amount of times that I've used each shade, but there are, I believe, still 12 shades in this palette that I haven't even used at all. There's a couple shades I've used more than once, but overall, I am just struggling to get myself to reach for this palette, and I do really enjoy this palette. I do kind of think this gives like April showers, bring May flowers sort of vibe, so I'm hoping to get some more use out of this palette this coming month, but I feel like this would have been a great palette for me to reach for in February, and that just didn't happen. So this palette will continue to remain in this project. The next 2 palettes rolled in last update, so we'll start with this one. This was a very easy palette for me to complete. It's the ColourPop Quad in the Creamsicle shade. I will post a picture on the screen of the look that I did using this palette. I was able to create a look like one full look using every single shade in this palette. And I'm so happy that this rolled into this project because it reminded me how much I really enjoy this palette and really enjoy like peachy coral looks. And I'm just really excited to continue to get use out of this for the spring and summer. I think this will pair really nicely with my Sigma Corderosa, as well as Kaja just sent over their, what is it, Peach Sorbet? Their Peach Kaja stack, which I absolutely love, and it pairs really nicely with this as well. So very excited to continue to reach for this. I did only reach for each shade one time, but this palette is complete. And I also will post photos of when I rolled this palette in versus now. I mean, I used each shade just one time, so I don't think there's gonna be much of a difference, but I think it's just fun to look at that as well. This palette also rolled in last update. This is the Pat McGrath Mothership Rose Decadence. I used to really love this palette, and I only reached for each of these shades one time as well. And now this palette is definitely on my chopping block and a palette that I'm considering decluttering during my end of June palette collection and declutter. I usually try and do 2 palette collection videos and at least 1 kind of declutter, sometimes 2 declutters per year. And this is definitely on my chopping block. I don't absolutely love Pat McGrath mattes, and these are not matte shades that I'm reaching for all that frequently. This is a really beautiful shade. I do have a pan in it, as you can see, and I also really enjoy this bronzy toned shade, but the gold I could really take or leave. I don't love gold eyeshadow, and if I'm reaching for a gold, I'd rather reach for the gold in the Pat McGrath Bronze Seduction palette. And then this shade was really a letdown, and I can't remember if this shade has always been so crumbly and flaky or if the quality of this palette is starting to kind of decline, but I just wasn't super excited about this, and I'm definitely considering decluttering this here during the summer. And then the fourth and final palette is the palette that's on my eyes today. It is the Pat McGrath Utopian palette. And this is what this palette looks like. I will have to post a picture on the screen showing each shade and how many times I used each shade, because there are a few shades within this palette that I reached for on multiple occasions. I will also post looks that I created with this palette. I think I only have 2 full looks, one of them being the look that I created today. There were a few days where I just reached into this palette, just only reaching for a shade to add to maybe a look that I was already doing. And then I started, so I always do my eyeshadow first, and I started a look one day and I ended up hating it. I used these 3 mattes all in one, and then this shade right here I didn't realize is more of like a deeper red to green to brown, or like red brown sort of duochrome shade, and it's just deeper than I was expecting. It's a nice shade, but it did not go with the look that I was trying to create, so I kind of wiped my makeup off and started over. Like this palette, I definitely still prefer the Bronze Seduction. The special shades in this palette are not like multi-chrome shades, they're just these like really intense glitters, but they're kind of flaky, and sometimes they work really well, sometimes I struggle with them, so it's really kind of hit or miss. I do really enjoy this shade, as well as this kind of like satin taupe sort of shade as well, and then this is a really beautiful, more subtle inner corner highlight. This shade right here makes for a really beautiful sunburnt blush shade. I actually really enjoyed using this as a blush. Not my absolute favorite palette in my collection, although I always mention Pat McGrath palettes really grow on me over time, and I end up loving them more and more as I use them. So this is up there as one of my more favorite Pat McGrath palettes, but I definitely still prefer the Bronze Seduction. Nevertheless, this palette will be rolling out because I did use each shade at least one time. All right, before we pull my wheel out, I'm gonna have a sip of coffee, start a screen recording, and we are gonna pull up my Tiny Decisions app. I do have every eyeshadow palette in my collection listed on my Tiny Decision app. If I re-roll a palette I've already completed, I will re-spin my wheel. And then I just also want to point out that I don't have any palettes that came into my collection in 2023 listed in this wheel because of what I mentioned at the beginning. All of the new palettes that are coming into my collection, I will have already no pan left behind, if you will. So I really want to focus on older palettes in my collection, or palettes that have been in longer. So we actually have 3 palettes to roll, which I'm kind of nervous about. All right, here we go. I'm really nervous actually. Okay. Ooh, Ooh, I was just thinking about this palette. It's the Danessa Myricks Lightwork Volume 3. I was just thinking about this palette because I saw someone recommend it in their Sephora VIB sale recommendations. And I was like, ooh, this is like the time of year I want to pull that palette back out. It is definitely a very special, unique palette, and it's all like special shades. There's no mattes in the palette, so I don't necessarily think I'm going to be creating a full look using this palette, but I'm super excited to pull this out and get use out of that palette. Okay, we're starting off, we're off to a good start. Next up, Natasha Denona Retro Glam. Ooh, this is exciting because this is, I included this in palettes that I was pulling out to use in the spring. I feel like this is a very kind of spring forward palette. It's a more cool toned pink palette, or spring palette, but I'm excited this got rolled in. It is a 15 pan eyeshadow palette, so definitely more pan, like definitely like heavier in the number of, oh yes! The Viseart, oh my gosh, yes! This couldn't have gone better for me. I was just thinking I wanted to pull my Viseart palette out as well. Oh my gosh, you guys, I am literally so excited about the palettes that got rolled in for this update. I'm gonna go grab those palettes and I will be right back to share them with you. All right, you guys, I'm back and we will go in order that these palettes rolled in. I am literally so happy about this, and it just makes me so excited to hit the ground running and work on these palettes. But up first we have the Danessa Myricks Lightwork Volume 3 palette. There are only 8 shades in this palette, so I want to say it should be easy for me to complete this, but at the same time, many of these shades aren't necessarily things that I would be reaching for on days that I'm creating a look to wear to work, although I do think I could get use out of some of them for work. And each shade, I don't necessarily think I'll create a full look by any means with this palette, but I do think I can mix and match some of the shades, and I'm just very, very excited to have an extra reason to reach for this. Next up, we have the Natasha Denona Retro Glam palette, and the thing that makes me most nervous about this palette is just the fact that it's 15 shades, and I really enjoyed this palette when I was testing it when I purchased this last holiday-ish season. And it just kind of gives me kind of a spring feeling. I feel like you've got these lighter pastels, you've got this beautiful like sage green, and just, it has light shades and deep shades, but it does very much give me a springtime feeling. So I feel like this is gonna be the perfect time for this palette to be in this project as well. I do think I can use this to create looks that I feel comfortable wearing to work. So that is palette number 2. And then palette number 3, I'm literally so happy about. This is my Viseart Soleil La Plague. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. But this palette, which I don't know if I reached for this, I maybe reached for this just a few times last year, but when I purchased this in 2021, I actually ended up loving this palette. It does give me a very summertime, like a very summertime feeling, but I also think I can make it work for spring because it's more of these really like subtle washes of shimmer, and I just think it's like very spring summer. And I'm hoping even after I complete this palette, this is one that likely will just kind of stay in my bathroom vanity and get quite a bit of use for me this summer. I'm very excited to reach for like this more in the summer. The yellow I'm super excited about, the pastel matte yellow on an inner corner. Ooh, yes, I'm so excited about this. So this is palette number 3, and there are 12 shades in this palette, so this one will also take a bit of time. I am hopeful that we'll have at least one rollout, but also a little bit nervous just because, again, I've been struggling to get myself to reach for the Huda Beauty Rose Quartz palette. This, I feel like my best chance might be the Viseart palette, just because I feel like this is very like everyday. And it's just so pretty. I'm so excited to pull out this Viseart palette. I think the Natasha Denona palette will give me some trouble in just that there's so many shades, it feels like, and I'm working on being more one-dimensional when it comes to just creating a look just using one palette, but sometimes I really struggle to create a look out of one palette using like a ton of shades. So we'll see how this one goes. Nevertheless, I'm super excited about it, and then maybe this one will be a rollout. It just depends. It just totally depends, but I am so excited to have this one out as well. this is my favorite update by far. I am so excited to work on my new palettes. I hope that you guys enjoyed this update. If you are doing a similar style project to this, let me know how it's going. Let me know how many palettes you have completed in this no pan left behind sort of situation if you're doing something similar. Would love to hear from you guys in the comments below. Other than that, thank you so much for sticking around to watch today's video and for supporting my channel as you guys always do. I love you guys so much, and I will catch you in my next video. Bye.